We are joined today by James Hogue, editor of Foreign Affairs magazine here in New York. Thank you very much for being with us.
Glad to be with you.
So all of this week, all of last week, of course, it's been dominated by news coming out of Gaza, the conflict involving Israel and Hamas.
Yeah.
Israel had very legitimate reasons to begin this operation. They wanted to stop missile strikes on its own people. However, the humanitarian crisis as a result of the conflict is eclipsing that message.
Right.
How much of a problem is that for Israel?
I think it's a big problem. And I think the humanitarian crisis has built up efforts to get a ceasefire from all quarters now. And it's my assumption that we're going to see one in the near future. And where are we going to be once the ceasefire comes into place? Israel will have accomplished some of its objectives. I think it will have destroyed most of the current rocket launching sites. It will have interdicted a number of the tunnels from Egypt that are bringing in fresh arms. But it will also have not removed Hamas as the governing force in Gaza. In fact, it has probably increased the recruitment attraction of Hamas for young, enraged Palestinians. So in the short term, anyway, we have seen yet another setback to the efforts to get a renewal of the peace process. Long term is a different matter, but it's going to take much more engagement by the United States than we've had in the last 8 years. And I think it's going to take a new three-pronged strategic approach to the problem. Not just Gaza, not just even the peace process, but Syria and Iran. These three are now interrelated, and if you don't attack all three at the same time, I don't think you can get anything.
You say attack, you mean when you attack the problem.
You attack the problem, right. Leave the guns at home.
The U.S. here, has its role been eclipsed as far as trying to bring peace in the Middle East?
No, I don't think so. There's no other power that's got the resources that we have to be an intermediary. What has happened is that our credibility has been lowered, and therefore our utility has been lowered. We have to build that back as well. I think we also have to make a greater effort to get other parties involved, the regional Arab states, European states, which have a big stake in the Middle East, and ultimately Russia. And that means really looking at the problem in a different way than we have in the past, as an integrated problem, not simply an Israeli-Arab problem.
Well, let's move away from the war just for now and to the economic news that continues, of course, to be terrible.
Yeah.
And the implications it has for a nation that has been very much involved in buying American debt, supporting our way of life, and that's China. That appetite to buy the debt is now diminished. What are the implications for Americans as a result of that?
Well, I don't believe the Chinese are interested in sabotaging our economic renewal because they need our market for their export-driven economy. But they are now under tremendous pressure at home because of a sharp contraction of business in China, fewer exports going out, less foreign investment coming in, higher unemployment. So they have a $600 billion stimulus plan, and it's mostly to create a more viable domestic economy. To do that, they've got to use some of the revenues they have been using to buy U.S. treasuries on themselves.
For the American consumer, though, what is this going to mean?
Well, if it's handled correctly, and I think the Chinese will be gradual in the reduction of amount of our debt that they're buying, it's going to make it more difficult for us to come out of the recession we're in, but it won't make it impossible. If they were to do something precipitous, like to cut off all investments in U.S. debt, then we'd have a major problem, but so would they.
Let's move on to the natural gas dispute that's really been between Ukraine and Russia. And I think many Americans would say, well, it's over a bill, basically, the gas bill. There's much more to it than that. There's a lot of politics here between Russia's trying to dominate in the industry of energy.
Well, this is now becoming an annual event. At the beginning of each year, Russia puts the pressure on Ukraine to pay more for the gas that it's got, to stop diverting some to itself that's supposed to be transshipped to Europe. And it can't go on this way because Europe is highly vulnerable, not just on this issue of energy in the middle of a very cold winter, but also on its foreign policies on everything else, like on Iran and so on. So we have been pressuring them to make greater efforts to get alternate sources of energy. So far we haven't been successful, but this may help.
And unfortunately, we're out of time. Thank you very much, James Hogue, for your insights.
Yeah.